When I got on the project, basically, I was the youngest person staffed by 5 years and the only non-Ivy League, non-valedictorian. So that was pretty intimidating. But I think that, I've talked to the project lead from that since then. He said, listen, you worked hard and you had a good attitude. And so, we made the investment. But I was up until 3 a.m. most nights, woke up probably at 8, rinse out the repeat, Monday through Friday, a little bit of work on weekends. But I think that was sort of set the tone for, if you work hard, good things will come. And one of the most accelerated rates of learning I've had in my career.
Hi, I'm Rory Holland, CEO of Customer and the host of Mighty Finsights. Every year, I have the privilege of talking with hundreds of fintech leaders and innovators. Today, I've invited one of these leaders to talk about the heart behind their work and the deep motivation they have to make a positive impact. In this episode, my guest is Joey Bouchard, the founder and CEO of QuoteWell, a company that is using technology to simplify the wholesale insurance industry and make it better, more human experience for everyone. Joey joined the workforce at a young age, working in his parents' pawn shop, and later taking a job with Palantir fighting terrorists after college. His professional and personal journeys have equipped him with a wealth of wisdom and insight. I'm honored to have QuoteWell as a client, but even if they weren't, I'd be excited to have Joey on the show. In this conversation, we're going to tackle why growth sometimes requires setbacks, how dating in New York City is the best sales training, and why QuoteWell had to pivot and focus harder on people to find success. Mighty Finsights will help you look past the headlines and the sales pitches to the human side of fintech and financial services. We're getting curious about the courageous choices and deeply human stories that shape how we engage with money. Join me as we dive beneath the brands to learn what's really happening.
Well, hey, Joey. So good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Likewise. Appreciate it.
Sounds like you guys had a nice meal today, heading into the holidays.
So we did, although I'll tell you a fun fact. There are a lot of really good restaurants open in Austin for dinner. Trying to find a fun lunch spot was a little bit harder. But if you haven't been to Uchiba yet, which is the latest of the trio, it's pretty tasty.
Yeah, I've heard good things. Thanks for the heads up. Definitely got to check that out. So I wanted to start out with I'm so grateful we got a chance to meet and talking off camera. We both love adventure sports. Like there's so much we could talk about there, and I won't go there right now, but I wanted to start with something a little bit more personal with you. And it was, I know how hard it is to sell insurance and to have a startup like what you've done with QuoteWell. But you told me off camera about a harder sell, and that was getting your wife's cell phone number.
Yeah.
I'd love you to tell me a little bit more about that story.
Great. Well, I'd probably preface that with I tell anyone going into sales that the best sales training you can get is actually being single in New York. I had a general mantra that, if I were to meet someone, and this is meeting someone at a conference, meeting someone at a bar, and this is friends, colleagues, or potential future spouses, try and get a phone number. And, you never know what comes of that, actually. But so fast forward, and my guy friends and I used to have a fun bar night every Wednesday where we called it Wine Wednesday. Went up, and then there happened to be 3 of us, and my future wife and her friend were at the bar. Place is packed, and there's one seat open. So I sit down next to him and try and just friendly break in, say, how's it going? Can I buy you a drink? And quick response was, I can buy my own drink. And I was like, oh, all right. Well, what's it take to actually, sit down and, have a conversation here? Like, what do you want, my resume? And then she said, yeah, give me your resume. Give me your, top 4 most interesting facts. And I was like, all right, are you sure? And then netted out at, okay, well, I just got back from living in London for a year. I'm running my first Ironman next week. I'm doing an ice diving trip to Iceland in like a month. And then also I PM an anti-terrorist product at a company called Palantir. And she said, oh, all right, you can stay. And then, hour and a half conversation later, and I say, well, can I get your number? And she actually said no. And then her friend said, you know what, be a big girl, give him your number. I think he's earned it at this point. And so then I got it, but she gave me her first name, Jenna, and her last name was just her last initial, Boyle, or B for Boyle. But I didn't know that was at a point in time. And then I said, well, what's the B stand for? And she said, my business. And I was like, all right, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. But then lo and behold, so I text her the next morning, don't get a response back. And the next day I end up seeing her friend out at a different restaurant somewhere in New York, which if you spent much time in Manhattan, running into the same random person 2 days in a row without coordinating that is pretty hard, especially in a different part of town. And so then met up and then took a selfie and sent it to her. And then she responded. So, lightning struck twice and here we are. But that was definitely the training paid off, and that was definitely the hardest number I ever had to get.
Yeah. I say there's a lot of applications into that when I think about how tough it is to sell insurance.
Yep.
And much less start an insurtech company and brand. You had mentioned that you were heading into Ironman. That was one of the criteria that you gave her. Give me some of the 3 most interesting things about you. But when it came down to you getting engaged, there's another story there too, because I think she thought of you a certain way, but something happened, and it was an adventure sports accident, I think.
Yes. So basically, I'm a big skier. And so, and I went skiing at Hunter Mountain, which is, the closest mountain outside New York, but it's not a very big, nothing that you get in the Rockies or anything like that. So I would just spend time in the terrain park. So I was going off the 2 biggest jumps they had there. And there's a rule in skiing, typically, you never go off the jump first without seeing anyone else go off it first to sort of read the lip, or you go over the roller and just see how it's constructed. And so there were 25-minute lines at the bottom to go up this 2-minute hill. So I didn't want to have to go down, hike back up, etc. So I was waiting at the top, and then this other guy's there too. Both sort of playing chicken, waiting for the other person to go. And he says, well, I asked him, do you want to go first? And he said, no, but do you want to go first? And I said, okay, sure. So I went off it. Turns out it was a bad jump, which they ended up shutting down afterwards, but I skyrocketed back up and then tore my ACL on the way down. So fast forward, and this is actually about when I'm trying to propose to my wife, which longer story short here, but I hired a student out of NYU from the set design school to decorate her childhood backyard into this pseudo movie set from her childhood. And but go figure, with the torn ACL, I couldn't bend down to get on one knee. So I needed to actually fix my brace into the kneeled position. And then I was sitting there waiting for her once she arrived there. And at the end, she's like, I think you sort of got me here. And I said, well, why? And she's like, well, when I met you, you were this Iron Man secret spy, and now you're, a crippled insurance salesman. And I'm like, well, this is what you got. And and here we are. And I don't think she regrets that trade at all.
Great. Well, she said yes.
Yes.
Good. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So you'd mentioned you were doing some work when you had met your wife, Jenna. You were doing work with Palantir. Take me back a bit, and then like Palantir and the Bootcamp, and like there were some unique things about how you entered into the work that you did for Palantir. A lot of traveling, a lot of interesting stories. But maybe tell me a little bit about what that experience was like surviving the Palantir Bootcamp, so to speak, and what was the Palantir Bootcamp back then to you?
I don't think it really was as much a boot camp, although they do host boot camps right now, which is basically their clever way of getting prospective customers to come on site for a day for a full day sales pitch. But that aside, so I was a role called a deployment strategist, which was sort of like a cross-functional, lightweight product manager, data scientist, consultant, etc. Also in charge of onboarding users to the platform. So we had hired new grad engineers for a long time. I was in an experimental cohort of 4 people who got hired out of undergrad for this role in particular. And so I had an engineering background, but not computer science. And so, but when my first client was a notable hedge fund in Connecticut that has a pretty interesting culture. And so, when I got on the project, basically, I was the youngest person staffed by 5 years and the only non-Ivy League non-valedictorian. So that was pretty intimidating. But I think that I've talked to the project lead from that since then. He said, listen, you worked hard and you had a good attitude. And so, we made the investment. But I was up until 3 a.m. most nights, woke up probably at 8, rinse out the repeat, Monday through Friday, a little bit of work on weekends. But I think that was sort of set the tone for, if you work hard, good things will come. And one of the most accelerated rates of learning I've had in my career, especially in the first couple of years there.
Yeah, what kind of learnings did you get from that? And I want to get into QuoteWell more in a second, but how did some of that learning, where did that come from, that work ethic? Because I think when we're young and we're ambitious, it might come easier to some of us, but not everybody has that type of work ethic. And what is it about you as an adult entering into your work with Palantir and starting to learn about insurance that gave you that drive? Like, where'd that come from?
So I don't think it was as innate. Like, there's a nature versus nurture. And I think I was probably a good amount of nurture actually in there where, in elementary school, I don't think I was actually probably the top of the class. And there's actually one story there that's actually still stuck with me where, I was in 3rd or 4th grade and I grew up in Virginia. And so there was some event where half of our class was going to go meet the president. And so, and they just picked basically the top half of the students. And I found myself sitting at school with the bottom half of the class when everyone else got to go meet them. And, I didn't know much as a 3rd grader other than, this guy's supposedly pretty important. And I don't know what I had to do to get in the bottom half or what I didn't do to that point to not earn the spot. And so I think that was a pretty big reset, actually, of, okay, I have to try a bit harder here. And I think then throughout my career, I don't like being in the bottom. There's a good interview question of, do you hate losing or do you like winning more? And I think there's a pretty good answer, which is, you hate losing, and they stick with you. And so the next big tranche was actually, I got into a magnet school. So Thomas Jefferson, Northern Virginia. And there were probably 20 feeder schools in there. And you could tell how good your middle school was based off of how many kids got in. And the average for my school was 0.5 kids a year versus the average across the other middle schools was like 15. So bit of a rougher environment in middle school, but transitioning in. I started my freshman year probably in the bottom 25% of the class and ended net probably in the top 20. And so I think that just that entire journey of needing to work your way up, and then in college, same thing. And then at Palantir, getting thrown into that environment, I didn't like being at the bottom there. So it just took a lot of hard work to get back to that level of saying, okay, I feel pretty good about where I'm at right now.
Yeah. And is that something it sounds like that's something you carried in from childhood and just adapted that to the work that you did at Palantir. And then you went on to Aon. Is that right?
Went on to Aon. And so but maybe rewinding the clock back to some of the Palantir stuff. So I think the lesson there is if you throw yourself in tougher environments, then you'll learn to adapt. But I think that surround yourself with really smart, interesting peers and tough problems, and there's room for growth there. Now on the transition to Aon. So when I was at Palantir, my second project after this hedge fund was a large insurance company based in London. And I had 3 big takeaways from that experience. 1, big market, a huge opportunity there. 2, I really like the domain. So insurance just has a lot of very interesting problems. And 3, the tech was really bad, non-existent within the industry. So that was enough of an inspiration to say, listen, maybe after Palantir, I'm ready to go into the insurance industry. I don't exactly know what yet, though. Do I stay working for a carrier? Do I go to a startup? Do I build my own company? Who knows? But the answers that clustered from my network were, go work at one of the bigger players and just try and learn for a year or 2 and see what happens. And so then went to Aon, really as a place to just say, hey, I'm in learning mode. COVID had just started really a month after I joined Aon. And so there was a hiring freeze. But Aon let me take on actually 3 jobs internally. I got paid for one of them. For someone that actually was trying to learn, I think it was a great experience. But, if I was trying to maximize time to value point in time, just from a monetary perspective, maybe not the best decision. But over a longer term time horizon, one of the best things I could have done. And so that is one piece of advice that I like to try and tell people, especially early, middle of their careers, which is growth typically isn't a straight line. Sometimes you might have to be a little more strategic and take a step back to catapult forward. I think that was a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned at one point, or maybe I may have read it about you, that you had traveled 5 countries in 5 days. Was that around that time period, and what was that like?
So that's a fun little story from when I was actually on this insurance customer in London. And so, I think that Palantir instituted a pretty good culture of get really close to the problems. That means you got to hop on a bunch of planes to sit next to users and go do it. And so versus, sitting comfortably remotely and reading user support tickets, et cetera, versus just go build relationships with the customer and go from there. So I was put on this task to go try and find a specific database schema that was supposedly very important. And it was like a quest. I was in London and they said, go to Frankfurt. There's this person there that might know. Flew to Frankfurt the next day. They said, actually, no, it might be someone in Rotterdam. Flew to Rotterdam. Actually, someone in Zurich. Flew to Zurich. And then the next was actually Schaumburg outside Chicago in Illinois. Flew across the pond. And then went from building A to building B and back and realized that no one knew where this thing was.
This might sound unnecessary, especially in the data-driven, tech-enabled world that Joey was working in. But in my experience, there's no substitute for getting up close and personal with a problem so you can truly understand how to solve it. Even though Joey's quest didn't end in success, his effort was no less valuable because it allowed him to take a different path. This happens in marketing too, not because anyone is trying to throw sand in the gears, but because nobody has taken ownership of the problem.
And so there were actually, I think, a couple of fun takeaways from just that as a story. One was, and this was part of the inspiration for why building QuoteWell was just that the data in insurance is so messy and complicated. And all these systems have so much intricacy to it where there's going to be a lack of domain expertise where people that truly understand the business of insurance and then also had a technical background, where that's where I saw some sort of opportunity for me in my career. And saying, I'm going to pick a domain, stick to it, and then maybe with the tech bent, some opportunities will open up. But then the second thing was just, I think, more of a work hard, play hard mentality. And so, there was a point in Palantir's history where we were trying to expand in Europe, but we didn't really have much of a brand there. So they said, listen, any American who wants to move to Europe for a little bit, raise your hand. We'll schlep you over there. And so, we had a good cohort of probably 20, 30 people. And so, we'd work like dogs, Monday through Thursday night, and then Friday afternoon, say, who wants to go, pick a random spot across Europe and let's go have fun. And so I went to Copenhagen after that with a lot of the guys and had a blast. So it actually ended up being, you could say, 5 countries in 5 days or closer to 6 countries in 6.
Goodness. What a great experience. And so it sounds like during that time is when the idea of maybe starting your own company emerged. Had you always had that ambition, or did it come out of these experiences so far that you've shared with us?
I think it actually, some of it started from just seeing what my parents had growing up, where my parents actually owned a pawn shop. And so, I worked there on weekends when I was 6 to 16, basically. And so seeing just the work ethic and everything they put in and knowing that they did have a little bit of the microcosm of an American dream. And so they worked hard and not your standard 40-hour week. There were a lot of times where it was a 70, 80-hour week. My dad traveled on weekends too. But at the end, it all paid off. So I think just seeing working and running your own business, I think was interesting and at least somewhat familiar. But then the second part of it was, when at Palantir, I think there was a good mantra of just, hey, try and find the tough problem and try and solve the tough problem by getting really close to it. And so, and when I was on the insurance customer, I saw there are a lot of problems in the industry and they're all pretty tough. And this is an interesting enough space where I might be willing to commit at least a good chunk of my career and life to this. And so while I wasn't fixated on starting something, I think when I looked around to see if there were other companies doing something innovative in the industry that matched some of the problems that I saw, there really wasn't any. So I'd say I would have been pretty happy actually going to work for another company. I don't think that there's, I think you talk to some entrepreneurs that say, I never work for somebody else. And I don't think that's true for me, at least. But to the extent that when I saw the opportunity, I wasn't afraid to go and attack it. And that brought us to where we are today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I definitely want to get into more about QuoteWell, but I got to ask a question.
Yeah.
What were some of the most interesting things that you saw pass through your folks' pawn shop?
Oh god. Let's see. There's the G-rated version, and then there's the let's say double X-rated version that sometimes people would put in a cardboard box and say, "Can I get any money for this?" And there's a lot of things that we rejected from the pawn shop actually that were pretty fun. So use your imagination there. But there was also a partially gold-plated knight in a suit of armor that stood upstairs for a long time. And then we got a lot of the standard stuff. So there were tools, TVs, guitars, etc. But then it was actually the pawn shop started out as a bait and tackle shop. And so, you'd get a fishing rod, and I actually worked the minnow counter for a long time. So you'd say, you want small minnows, give me a dozen, have my little step stool, scoop it up. And then I'd use my second step stool up to get to the cash register. And everyone's looking at me like, why is there a 7-year-old kid running the cash register right now and giving me minnows? And they say, boss's kid. And, that was usually enough to say, all right. So I think that the fact that there just was this like live bait component of the pawn shop that stuck around for a while was probably a fun portion of it. And then past that, so we actually used to keep inventory upstairs, especially the stuff that people had on layaway. And so we had a lot of samurai swords. And my dad might not actually know this, but if I was ever up there sorting inventory by myself, I'd take out the samurai swords and just start swinging those left and right and having fun with it.
I was going to ask, did anything ever go home with you? Even if your parents don't know, they're going to find out if you say it, but I'm just curious.
No, nothing that I'd take, but that was actually, I could work for cash or I could trade in and get something from the pawn shop's value, actually. And so, if we were going to sell a samurai sword, there are some things they could say no to me having, so, they wouldn't let me take home a gun. If I got paid $100 for the day, I could probably get $200 worth of something from the pawn shop. And so usually that'd be like video games, DVDs, things like that.
That's so awesome. What a great childhood that must have been, having those experiences. And then your grandparents too, I think, had a small business.
So they didn't have a small business, but they worked across, I like to say, like, my grandparents are an excellent quintessential sampling of people in their careers at that point in the country's history, where one was a journalist, one was a nurse, one worked at a steel mill, and then one was a teacher. And so across all those, different versions of middle class America that all worked hard and paid off for future generations there. But, going back to the pawn shop story really quickly. So there's one thing I actually talked to my wife about this past weekend, which is I want to find something for my son to do in the realm of just like lightweight work when they're little. And so my neighbor actually keeps chicken coops. The chickens are actually really fun to have around the neighborhood. Some people can complain about that, and I think they're fine. But I want to try and strike a deal and say, listen, can my son sell your chicken eggs to the neighbors? Just get in some sort of early rep of, honestly, sales. And I think that's something that was really important to me, less so cleaning the showcases at the pawn shop, but working commission and knowing you just have to get out there and talk to people. And I think just like breaking through that barrier early and saying, oh, by the way, if I work and if I talk to people and I get paid money to do that, interesting. So if you can lock that in as some sort of early behavior, that's great. Versus, I see too much where, there are people that go to school, they graduate, they have a 4.0, and then it comes to the workforce and like, wait, it's, tell me exactly what to do. I'll do a really good job at that, and give me a 4.0 again. And that's not really how work works.
That's not how it works.
And so, and in any facet of a career, there's going to be some sort of sales and persuasion. So start them young and see where things go from there.
Yeah, door-to-door sales was something I started early as a kid, and I'm grateful for it.
Yep.
Having to get out there.
Out of curiosity.
I did a bunch of things. Cutting grass was kind of the first thing. I remember when the first Sony Walkmans came out with the big fuzzy thingies, right? And you you could have the radio or the cassette tape. And so back then it was like Def Leppard and all that stuff back in the 80s. But yeah, so that was the beginning for me. And then I started a pressure washing business, and then, take pictures of before and after of the work that we did. And it was me and a buddy of mine, and we would go spend a week selling door to door, getting a bunch of business. Then we would go to the local hardware store and rent the pressure washer and the equipment, and then go show up the next week and do the work. And it was, on and off 1 week at a time. And you get used to hearing the word no, or get off my front porch, or, quit soliciting me, all kinds of things. But, it was really a gift. And I still remember those experiences today. So I wanted to talk about QuoteWell. So tell us, who is QuoteWell? What do you guys do? And then I had a follow-on question I want to talk about basically wholesale brokering.
Okay, great. So I think maybe actually working backwards from there. So what is wholesale broking? And that, without bearing the lead, QuoteWell is a modern AI-driven wholesale brokerage. And so now when people say the word insurance, there's really three different buckets. So you've got health insurance, life insurance, and then property and casualty insurance. So property and casualty insurance is basically divided 50-50 in the US in terms of opportunity and market size, where personal lines, everything a consumer would buy, so homeowners, auto insurance, versus on the commercial side, that's everything businesses need, which tend to be a bit more complex in terms of different products. And that, construction companies need very different types of insurance than a doctor would, or a medical provider. And so now within a typical commercial insurance transaction, you've got three different parties. You have a business owner that needs that insurance. You have what I refer to as a retail agent. So what you think of as your friendly insurance agent that helps you find it. And then you've got an insurance company that actually underwrites the risk and issues the policy. So a little known fact is that there's a secondary intermediary involved in about 20-25% of transactions called a wholesale brokerage. So they sit in between the retail agency and the insurance companies. And so if a retail agency doesn't have the right relationship or right to carry an insurance company's product, the worst thing they can do is try and go out to their own relationships, get told no from everyone, and then they have to give up the lead and say, hey, listen, I can't find the right home for this, for the right coverage or price point, et cetera. So instead, they'll use a secondary intermediary called a wholesale brokerage to say, hey, listen, QuoteWell, can you find us a home for this? And then we will look through a broader network of carrier relationships. So just to give a sense check there, we have about 150 of these carrier relationships today and carry multiple products across those 150. And so, with that, then that gives us more of like a search function for, hey, can we try and actually find a home for this risk? And we act like almost as a clearinghouse. Now, there's a second element of this that probably would take up 10 minutes of the podcast to talk through, which is the compliance nature of the types of insurance that wholesale brokers tend to sell. The very short version of that is that there are state-approved products and products that the state hasn't reviewed the language. Doesn't mean they're bad. It just means non-standard. And wholesale brokers tend to specialize in that. So you want to have someone that really understands those products and can broker them appropriately. Now, for what QuoteWell's doing, we're basically building a tech platform to supercharge our own brokers and producers broadly. And so think of it as their core system plus agentic workflows and AI that are actually doing some of the work on their behalf. Now, there is something that we have as a company principle called the H+ principle, which is basically stands for human plus. So when our customers ask us both, retail agents or carriers saying, are you guys a fully automated platform? Are you a comparative rater? We say absolutely not. We are driven by people. We're building relationships with you. You could pick up the phone and call us, but there's a lot of the admin that we are trying to automate. But our brokers and underwriters all have an opportunity to come and sit within the system and see what's going on. So it is designed appropriately for actually that human to machine engagement that I think a lot of folks are lacking. So I think that's probably us in a nutshell, is really just trying to scale up and build a next gen brokerage that has a very interesting place and role in the insurance distribution ecosystem.
Yeah, and how did it begin, and what were some of the biggest challenges that you had in getting going? Share a story or two.
Yeah, well, I think from our side, so for a lot of startups, fundraising is probably, one of the bigger hurdles. And for us, actually probably wasn't the biggest one. I think that the Palantir brand and reputation held pretty strong there. So getting investor interest wasn't too hard. And I think the back of the napkin pitch was, hey, there's this guy that worked at Palantir for 6 years, really loved insurance, went to go work in the industry for a year to really learn a bit more, and then came out the other side and said, I'm building this industry that's large and growing that you've never heard of before. Okay, it sounds like maybe it's worth a seat check. But I think investors will tend to pattern match your business to some known framework or paradigm. So for us, Wholesale Brokerage looks like a B2B marketplace. We have insurance agencies on one side of the equation, insurance carriers on the other. And for any B2B marketplace, you get a question of, hey, chicken or the egg? How do you get agencies on without having insurance products to sell? And how do you get insurance products to sell without having any sort of agency flow? And in the early days, I think that we took probably a more traditional like venture and tech approach and said, hey, we can bootstrap this with technology. And basically started off and trying to be a little bit too cute with how do we automate the ingestion of insurance applications to flow through to insurance carriers, and doing that nearly for free. And so using it as more of a software tool that we gave to insurance agents, and that was our beachhead into eventually building the Wholesale Brokerage. But I think within fintech broadly, where compliance hurdles and everything, trying to be too key to differentiate with your business model too early might be the kiss of death. Which luckily we had fundraised enough where we got a second go at this. But we ended up actually pivoting our strategy to say, listen, what if we hire quality wholesale brokers and build a platform for them? The full automation piece of this might be a little bit too tough. And that's where we really saw a ton of traction in the business to say, okay, great, I think we actually can do this. And by the way, the relationships, the people matter so much in this. And that was just a complete oversight before. So the biggest gap we had was talent.
That's a revelation that I suspect many startup founders have had to learn the hard way. Some business challenges appear to be deeply technical, and maybe they are, but often the human, psychological, and relational aspects of the problem get missed. It also takes a lot of humility to admit that your business was struggling with a talent gap, not a technology gap. This is a big part of what has made it so exciting to work with the QuoteWell team. They're willing to look at challenges head on and work together to find the best solution.
We didn't have enough insurance talent on the team. Had we had that from day one, then I think we might have charted a slightly different course. But I will say that I'm pretty happy where we're at today.
And how did you discovered that you didn't have the right insurance talent on staff. How did you go find those people?
By hook or by crook. I think all things in recruiting and sales in the industry, it's a lot of hard work. There's no single partnership, no single one thing that made things that much easier. And so, but our first hire was actually one of our first software customers. So he owned a retail agency and was a user of the software and said, I love what you guys are doing. And we said, great, we're actually hiring brokers now and used to be a wholesale broker. Would you like to come join? So he was actually our first hire. And then the next two were then going from there and just trying to hit up every single agency we knew in our network saying, do you have any wholesale brokers that you like and know? Then led us to a second one who led us and referred to our third one. And then a bit of a flywheel from there. And, it's interesting. Take even a look at sidestep into Palantir, where I think over 50% of Palantir's workforce was built from referrals, at least while I was there. 20% from college recruiting, 20% from outside of college recruiting. I think 1% actually came to the website. And so for us, I think it's been probably close to 50% referrals across the business, or I help personally recruit. And then a mix of third-party recruiters, some folks we've hired in-house, and gone from there.
What do you think it is about, as I've gotten to know you and, the work that we've done together as customers working with you guys and want to get into some of the marketing work and the branding work that we've recently done with you guys to get your thoughts on it. But what do you think it is about the culture that you've built and your history and your competitive nature, your interest in taking risks, ice diving, which I hope we have some time to get into. That's just your story with ice diving is crazy. What do you think it is about the culture that you've built that allows you to have this 50% plus recruiting, referral recruiting that's coming from internal?
Well, I'd say internal, internal, and also, leadership being personally involved in outreach there. So 1-2 punch. But I think that even just taking a look at how wholesale as an industry has developed, because a lot of what we're recruiting are wholesale brokers that work at the incumbents right now. And rewind the clock back to 2010, and the biggest three wholesale brokers controlled about 30% of the market. Today, they went through a pretty big M&A period, especially in the 2010s and into 2020, where they control about 70% of the market. And so there's a lot of consolidation. And so with that, there's not a ton of competition necessarily across, or there's not a lot of vendor choice and selection at this point. So if you're a wholesale broker that works in construction in Dallas, turns out at your same company, you probably have 20 competitors. That doesn't feel great from a cultural perspective. And so I think just from actually building a team and culture that's collaborative, we can do that at our scale. Absolutely. We have plenty of runway to do that. But once you hit the scale of 3,000 wholesale brokers at one company, there's going to be some infighting. The second piece is just the weight we have in our technology. And so we currently have about a 2-to-1 ratio for every 2 people on the insurance side of the house. We have 1 engineer right now, which means that you've got this R&D team in your back pocket that isn't just typical IT, where they reset your passwords and make sure that your laptop works, versus, hey, we're building you next generation software. If you have a problem, we can work through this together and actually solve it pretty quickly. So I think just having that solution and knowing that tech is doing more and more on behalf of the producers, that's motivating, and hopefully a primary reason for them to join. So you've got the culture, you've got the tech, and then also just in terms of how we comp, everyone has ownership in the business. Every full-time employee has equity, and I think that's really important. It's not a place where you have to work up until you're an MD before you have sort of right to buy in, versus saying, this is what startups have done for a long time, and we want to bring that to an industry where that hasn't necessarily been the same financial option for them. So we have shared upside. And so I'd say it's probably the 1, 2, 3 there. And knowing that our goal is to grow, and we are, and to innovate. And so is that hopefully a pretty attractive option for folks, given the platform we have to date, which, there's a lot of insurance infrastructure, let's say, that we've put in place over the past couple of years, whether that's the right carrier appointments or the tech platform to really be soup to nuts there. We're launching our first programs division really in Q1, which may or may not mean too much to the audience, but really it's building out our own custom insurance products, which I think is a good litmus test for just our maturity within the industry and how we're being seen externally by both our customers of retail agents, but also by prospective hires, so the producers.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, I could see where a culture like that and the technology leaning that you're doing with all the new innovations is really attractive, particularly in the giant insurance industry. Being a niche player like you guys and building really cool tech is really appealing. So I want to talk about the rebrand. So folks who are just discovering QuoteWell through this podcast are going to go to the website. They're going to go to LinkedIn. They're going to be like, they're going to have to say what they have to say about the brand and the marketing. But I wonder how you feel, and like how has your internal team responded to it? And before you answer that question, I guess first, like, what inspired you to rebrand?
Yep. Well, let's just go through the naming journey from the start, which I think is actually a fun one. And so, when I had left Aon, I basically took a 3-month break and actually went skiing. And I'd always wanted to have a little bit of like an eat, pray, love ski bum period in my life. That was the one juncture before saddling up to do this thing. So I was in Colorado with my wife, and every time I had an idea, I thought, for this is going to be a good name, the domain was already taken. And so I worked through probably 6 iterations of going to GoDaddy, just hoping like, oh, this one seems like it'd be open. Nope, it's taken. Where it's going to cost me $10,000. And so the first one we actually landed on was a name called Capacity Post. So it's be a trading post for your insurance capacity. And turns out after 2 years of that being the primary name and having customers say, what? After we talked about it enough, we realized, all right, it doesn't really flow off the tongue and it doesn't make intuitive sense. So then, and this is when the company's probably 20 people, we had an NCAA style tournament challenge of everyone got to submit 4 names. And then we put them in a bucket and then made a full bracket, 64. And we just had a vote of, hey, name A versus name B. Right hand up, left hand up, and worked our way to a final 4 there. And then said, all right, it's going to be one of these 4 names. And our head of design, Ethan, was sitting there. And all designers, I think, are all good designers, I think, are very good listeners. So Ethan comes back the next day and says, I've got a better name than any of the ones we had in the bracket. QuoteWell. I already checked. We can get it. And I was like, damn it, he's right. So it was a fun exercise, but actually Ethan came up with the new name. And so, I think that in the early days, and brand, I have such an appreciation for how hard that in marketing is these days, where you really do need experts for that. like brand customer, which we've been very happy with the service and the product to date. 2 years from the initial rebranding from Capacity Post to QuoteWell, I think that we learned more about who we were trying to target and build towards. Where were the places where our external prospective customers were getting tripped up on how they thought and viewed us. And so we went through probably a 3-month, really discovery exercise on an accelerated timeline, which, customer did a great job in helping keep to the milestones there. But on the backside of it, really landed on this, hey, we are both a tech company, but we understand that insurance is a relationship business. And that's not going anywhere. We're building around the people. But are we actually on the bleeding edge and trying to disrupt certain ways of how the industry operates? Yes. And so, the H plus principle, actually, and just the look and feel of everything, it has elevated us to another level there. And as much as, I was presenting to some of our investors recently, and, there's one deck where you use the template, like, oh my gosh, the rebrand's so great. And so I think that all that's helped us get just to the next level of professional and ability to communicate what we're actually trying to do.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm glad that you like it. We're pleased with it as well. I've loved working with you guys. And it's great to hear positive feedback. I wanted to ask you, what was the experience like from your side in going through the rebrand process? And I've been through them a lot in my career, been doing this for 25 plus years. So, and I've been through them personally on my own side, and it's much different doing it from my perspective as the agency working with the client than being the client. Like there's, for me, there's a lot of emotion. Like we went through rebrand here at Customer ourselves a couple of years ago. It was hard. Like it's hard. It was cathartic in some ways, I suppose, and it was therapy in other ways. And like, cause you're really having to dig in. And I'm just curious, what was a process like for you and your leadership team? And then how did the team respond to it? And like any feedback you can share there?
Well, first off, I'll give a shout out to our company president, Clark Church, who he basically saw, hey, I think we have a brand problem, and it's not that it's negative. It is just inaccurate. And, it's not resonating with people. If they look at QuoteWell and look at what they have online or what we have online for us, it doesn't match how people feel when they actually get to know us as a company. So we were doing ourselves a disservice there. And so for him, it was then we've got a problem. All right, step one, we don't have the muscle to do this ourselves. Let's run a pretty thorough process. We evaluated 12 different vendors, and customer came out on top there. But then once even selecting customer, he was the driving force to make sure that we actually got this thing moving as fast as we could. So he's probably the main person to actually talk through more of the guts of the process. But there was a team of 4 of us that were all involved basically in a smaller group of saying, hey, listen, we're all going to be on side for the bigger decisions here. And so I was obviously involved in that. And I think that and this may be an obvious thing from your perspective, but I know in brand basically existing as its own separate identity. In thinking of how you are building and investing in that concept, which we as humans can think of brands as their own separate thing. Companies, aside from the legal documents that incorporate them, that is all a manifestation of like, what is this concept? How do you feel about that? And I hadn't ever had to actually grapple with that from QuoteWell's perspective versus just thinking, well, QuoteWell is what QuoteWell is versus no, what do you want QuoteWell to be? How do you need to externalize that message? And that's hard, especially within fintech and finance and in insurance. Trying to grapple with those concepts and the verbiage and the words that might be harder to describe. It's a process. I had a manager once at Palantir that said, Joey, your words matter. So be thoughtful about them. And I will say in my early 20s, I probably was a little bit less thoughtful on that front. And when it comes to brand, that's absolutely true. And so each word matters. What are the main things you're actually going to stick to your guns by? And making sure that you're comfortable with that, because that is what is living on as the, not quite living, breathing, but as close to that manifestation of your business as you can get.
Yeah. Brands are an experience for people.
Yep.
How do they, so I often, when I talk to leaders of companies and executives, they often think about a brand as a logo. Certainly that's a component of it, but it's what the experience, the market, your team, your internal team, your employees, your staff, your clients are actually having with you is such a big piece of that. So when you talk about your perspective on it and having to sit with that, like, words matter very much. And particularly in our space in fintech and financial services, where it's a noisy market, there's lots of people saying lots of different things. And if you can't say it in a concise way in 10 seconds or less, or quickly on a website in a handful of words, that's going to be compelling, and then matching that with a visual experience, and then all the strategies that we employ here with our clients and that we're doing with you guys too, to pull people in, make sure they're in the right fit, they feel comfortable, they feel like it's a credible brand, they're in the right place, and then taking the next step. It's an experience that a lot of leaders at companies don't get to go through, at least the way that I hear it from a lot of our clients. And we've done a lot of brand work over the years, but I'm pleased to hear that not only yourself, and yes, Clark's awesome, but then also your investors and your board have had some positive things to say. So I wanted to ask about, as we've rolled out this new brand and you're moving to this next level of taking QuoteWell to the next level, how do you see the marketing going? And like, are there any particular challenges you currently see in the moment and as you look into the beginning of 2026?
Yep. So I think in the earlier part of our conversation, we talked about wholesale brokerage being similar to a B2B marketplace. And I actually like to call it more of a three-sided marketplace, where you have insurance agencies on one side, you have insurance carriers on the other, and then you have producers or brokers at QuoteWell, really as a third, that really help with that facilitation of everything in between there. And you're trying to basically captivate each of those audiences. And so in a know your customer profile, we have three, and then different derivatives and profiles of each of those. So it's hard to be everything to everybody. And so how do you actually communicate a consistent brand that resonates with all three of those, but then also go deeper as needed?
Oh man, this is such a good articulation of why branding is valuable and why it's difficult to do well. There's so much nuance and so many intangible factors that it's almost a miracle when a brand really hits a home run. But it's not a miracle. It takes a lot of hard work and real-world expertise to create a cohesive brand that delivers a consistent message. This is another area where the human side is vitally important. A brand is an expression of ideas, an experience that can shift with the culture or stagnate it if you let it. In short, great branding is never an accident, and if it's done right, it looks easier than it is.
And for somebody to discover that and engage with that in the right way for each of those different profiles. So I think we spent a lot of time on the producer brand. There's going to be more that I think we see on the agency side that we need to work at in 2026 together.
Yeah, and it's a lot of work rolling out a rebrand and then making sure that the market is receptive to it, and then tracking and measuring all that, and then all the activities that we'll be doing together. And a lot of it comes back from your team. What are your sales folks and your business development people saying? What are your clients saying? So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to transition a bit and just thinking about, I know you work really hard, and just knowing your background and some of the stories you've shared. Can you think of a moment of time when you've come home and you've had a full day, but like you've really crushed it that day? Anything that you can share, like we really felt like you nailed it. Any experiences like that?
You know what? I'll answer the question in a different way, which is, there's always, I don't think there's any single one win, which that's actually one thing that, given the nature of our business, every single deal matters. We're not just a software provider where there's one big sale and then you can sort of sit back and wait for the next year on the renewal there, versus every single deal, every single customer engagement, every single feature we're building out for the brokers, it builds up into something bigger. So it's a lot of little moments. And so, I take almost the integral of the day and say, hey, did all those little moments add up to something better than expected that day? Or, were there some setbacks all that day? And more often than not, the little moments all add up to something that is net more positive going in, and that energy just keeps on fueling me. But and I think fuels the business. Now, the other thing is actually a tradition that my wife and I do every night, which we just call three things, which is at the end of the day, we just say, hey, this is a lesson from my parents. They said, never go to bed angry. And so we just talk about, hey, what are the three highlights from the day? And not three biggest moments from the day, because sometimes those are negative, but just end on an optimistic note. And so, I have noticed, though, for whenever I talk about the work stuff, my wife's been along for the ride for everything in QuoteWell over 4.5 years, so she knows, as much of the ins and outs as anyone. But for the work stuff, it's almost just going back to that integral. I've had a really good day. There are a lot of little things here and there, so when I find myself just trying to pick apart one moment, it's really hard. But then the other stuff from the day that also just brings me that energy is, playing with my kid. Seeing, and he's 2.5 years old right now. So just seeing him learn, and like, those are big moments for me. So again, all little things.
It sounds like that's a wonderful tradition, by the way, that you and your wife do. And I imagine if you're having those level of conversations with your wife, that she probably plays a pretty big role in you taking a beat and like slowing down at the end of the day and be like, okay, reflect, be introspective. Like, how did it go? Is that, would you describe it that way?
Yeah. And I think that's something that, she'll ask me how the day goes and I just start rattling off, which I tend to be a little loquacious and talk a little fast, which I'm sure the listeners can probably agree with. But from my side, and especially in the earlier parts of QuoteWell and even while at Palantir, her big mantra was just, Joey, slow down and take a beat. And so, that's never, I think I've never had a problem moving too quickly. I've probably had a problem from not slowing down enough and actually trying to be thoughtful and reflective. And so, having those forced moments together where, if I'm talking about the day, she might say, why don't you hold off a day until you make that decision? There are other people in the company that, we work together for a couple years or more at this point, and also say, Joey, maybe take a beat, slow down. And, we talked about this a little bit in a prior conversation, but I don't have any tattoos yet. But there's one that my wife proposed that we both got. We've held off for now, but it's actually a musical annotation called a Cesra, which basically just means pause. And like having a little to basically tildes to say, hey, listen, never hurts to take a pause. And at least for me and my personality, I think that's true.
Yeah, it's healthy. I'm actually in the middle of reading a book that I've been meaning to read for probably 5 years, The Relentless Elimination of Hurry. Mm-hmm. It ties so much to that. Just pause and reflect. Because we work in this rapid paced environment and get things done and check the boxes, and the transactional way of being is easy. I fall into it where I just got to get stuff done. There's not a lot of joy in that, nor can you really build relationships well that way. So it's an intentional activity I'm doing to read this book. It's also intentional, something I have to do every day. So I love that idea. Yeah, we did talk a little bit about tattoos. I have one of my own. They can be very meaningful, and it sounds like that's one that you'll have to let me know. I'll have you back on, or just let me know if you guys end up doing that. I had a couple more questions. I wanted to talk about your thoughts on being mission driven. Like, we as an agency are mission driven through our work and trying to make a positive impact in the lives of the people that we work with, and helping our clients do the same for their clients. I'm a big believer in, let's just like you and I having this conversation. If we can make a positive impact on each other and sharing good, valuable knowledge and insights that, we might carry it home with us, and then it might get shared with a neighbor, and that neighbor might share it with someone else, right? So a societal effect in kind of mini one-to-one relationship ways. How do you think about QuoteWell, the work that you do, when it comes to being mission-driven and making a difference?
A few things. So one, just fundamentally, insurance is a really important part of our current, civilization, structure, financial well-being, et cetera, where I've actually come pretty close to a dash experience, two different larger claims in my life, one on the commercial side and then one on the personal side. So growing up, my parents had one robbery when they were at the pawn shop that had they not actually had the appropriate coverage for something that actually would have likely gone through a wholesale brokerage as a pawn shop, given it's a bit of a funkier risk, business would have been under. And we were made whole at the end of that. And had we taken that hit at that point in the company's juncture, then the business might not have actually lasted through that. So I think that was really important. And then that's actually what that experience when Palantir gave me a couple different options on where to staff myself. They said, what about an insurance company? I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, insurance is a great thing. And I don't think everyone probably had that same response. And so the second was actually the beginning of COVID. I was living with my in-laws at the time. I was living in Manhattan, and then COVID shut things down. So moved in with them in New Jersey for a little bit, and there was a house fire. Had we not had the appropriate coverage there, then that's also for many people, their homes are their most valuable asset. And so insurance made us whole in both those circumstances. And it's something that you hope no one actually ever has to use, but when it's there, it's really important. So I can get behind trying to make that more efficient, because insurance, I think of as a supply chain problem. There are so many different facets and handoffs that there are just ways that we can actually try and make that simpler. And wholesale brokers have a unique point in the value chain where we are pretty heavily connected, where I think we can put our dent there and try and make that better service ultimately for the end business owners. And so that's one thing. And then the next part of this is really just building a company that's set on principles and actually standing behind those. And so for me, I'd like to think I'm a relatively principled person. And so they're not just lip service. It is how we work and how we ultimately operate. And so, and there's always been one version of this principle that we've had. And we've redone the principles of the company 3 different times. So we're currently in the 3rd iteration. And they should evolve as the company evolves, and that it's really your perspective point in time and, what the company needs and very much what you believe then. But a version of, be a good human, and ultimately insurance is about relationships. It's not just about binding policies. That's something that treat people the right way, how you want to be treated. And I think that we very much hold to that. And so, with that, I'm very happy in the culture and everything we've built. Hopefully we'll be a happy place to grow and other people to work at as well.
Man, this has been wonderful. Such a great conversation. You have such interesting background, good stories. There's so much you and I have in common. I'm really, really glad that we got to know each other and that we're getting to work together. Mm-hmm. If people want to connect with you and QuoteWell, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think 2 things. One, if anyone wants to shoot me a note on LinkedIn, I check that pretty easily. So that's on the personal basis for folks. But then also if you're a producer, maybe looking for a change of pace and a new opportunity, then I'd say apply for the website. Unlike Palantir, we do review that. And I think it's a good way to still get in touch with us. And then likewise, if you're a retail agency, then there's a good link to go through there and say that you might want to start working with us. But I like to say, actually, for those that have watched The Office, there's the episode where Ryan creates the woof, where it's like, hey, the fax machine goes off, the email goes off, the phone call goes, and for everything, if you try and get a hold of us, we're pretty receptive. We are Brokerage, we pick up the phone. And so, probably not the hardest to get in touch with us if you want to try.
Well, it's been awesome chatting with you. Thanks for making the time.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Joey.
Let's just take a beat here, a caesura, if you will. Joey Bouchard is changing the insurance industry from the inside out. And not just because he stumbled on product market fit and some willing investors. He's seen firsthand how insurance can be the difference between catastrophe and hope. I think that Joey's story about meeting his wife and how he eventually proposed is beautiful and a powerful metaphor. In life, being persistent is required if you want to achieve big things. And even at your lowest points, you need to be willing to ask big questions. After all, we can't all be Ironman athletes, super spies, or stay forever young. Eventually, we need real people and real relationships that can endure the difficulties and tragedies of life with us. Just like we want insurance to protect us financially when disaster strikes, our friends and family are there to support us when life gets hard. Joey Bouchard had so many stories to tell than we had time to hear. But if you take one thing away from this episode, I hope that you remember that no matter how fast your life is moving, there's always time to take a beat and reflect. You can't hurry your way to happiness. And maybe the better we get at living in the space between life's ups and downs, the richer our life becomes.
Thank you for listening to Mighty Finsights. You'll find all of our episodes on our website, cstmr.com, including more one-on-one interviews with fintech and financial leaders and deep dive episodes on topics like branding and marketing. This show is produced and distributed by Customer, a digital fintech marketing agency, all rights reserved. Our production team includes Zach Garver, Becky Dombrowski, Brad Jerger, Romina Gomez, and Bailin and Curio.